In this presentation, I'm going to analyze Yosef Burg's collection of short stories, Afn Tshermush or Afn Tshermush, which depends on the year of publication. And the main object of my study is representation of the borderland Jewish identity in the Bukovina region at the beginning of the 20th century. And the described region, Bukovina, was located between Romania and Ukraine. It was the borderland on the margins of Austro-Hungarian Empire. So I'm going to discuss the meanings of language and the meanings of narration with which the image is created and how the borderland reality influences the textual reality. So to start with, it should be mentioned that in multi-ethnic Bukovina, Jews made up the majority of the population in several important towns, such as Chernivtsi or Chernovitz, and they comprised up to 30% of the city's population. But it was also the only region in Central and Eastern Europe where a significant proportion of Jewish population worked in agriculture or worked as lumberjacks. Also, though their native language was mainly Yiddish, a distinctive feature in these regions was also that the relatively large proportion of Jews who resided mainly in the countryside also could speak fluent Ukrainian. And overall, it is possible to characterize Jewish literature in general as two-dimensional. So there were German-speaking Jews. They had mainly modern and secular life. They were reformists or converted Christians or atheists. They belonged to higher social classes, and their language, German, was the language of education, literature, and like the language of empire. And as an opposite to them, Yiddish-speaking Jews were the lower social strata, and on the other hand, they stayed in closer interaction with other ethnicities and with other languages of this region. And in general, the described region, Bukovina, was characterized as Sprachinsel, or the so-called linguistic utopia, with 4 languages in a kind of a melting pot. So Yiddish, German, Romanian, and Ukrainian. As a framework for my study was the conception of othering and writing back. So othering could be described as a process when the identities are set up in an unequal relationship, but it is also possible for the cultural other to clear space from him or herself to write back against this unequal relationship and to transform oneself from the object of as in the case of Jews in the Bukovina region, from the object of Euro-Christian representation to the object of one's own mode of creativity, as Gerald Frakes writes. And this process of writing back, we will be observing shortly on the example of Burg's short stories. So Yosef Burg was a Yiddish writer and journalist born in town of Vizhnitsa in this region, and the history of the publications of his collection of short stories, Afn Tshermush, could be divided into several steps. So the stories that later compiled this collection were written in Chernivtsi in the mid-30s of the 20th century, and they were first published in the newspaper Chernovitsa Blätter. And after that, they were published in Bucharest as a separate book under the title Afn Tshermush. But the reprinting, which then happened in the Soviet Union in Chernivtsi gave them a slightly different name, Afn Tshermush, and the publishing house Sovietsky Pisatelь, a Soviet writer, made a large revision of the text, and this revised edition was published in 1980. And then in 2005, the publishing house Hans Bold Verlag published a complete German version of the stories, and this publication was based mainly on the first Bucharest and unedited edition of the text. And if to speak about Afn Tshermush, the main picture which is described is the life of the narrator's or the author's father. The stories are partly autobiographical, and they present the life of lumberjacks and timber rafters, the everyday life, their routine, and their interaction with Ukrainian peasants, Jewish peasants, and all the people of the region. Another framework for the study was the concept of Detritalization of the language. It is the ability to turn the poverty of a marginalized language into the semantic richness of his texts. And in the case of Yosef Burg, and in the case of many other Yiddish Bukovinian writers, Yiddish language has like double marginalization, because it was also marginalized comparing to the German language as main and more popular there. But I'll present then linguistic strategies of establishing this landscape, and it could be seen that the vocabulary of the short stories contain a lot of Ukrainian dialectical borrowings. They could be divided into several thematic groups. So it is river and its surroundings, which you can see on the right. So there are words such as Ričke, Povin, Zaviruche, Kose, Prizbe, Cvintar, Stelie, and so on, which are Ukrainian borrowings. But on the other hand, we have also Ukrainian dialectical borrowings, which are characteristic for only the Bukovina and Galicia regions, such as Kolibe, hut in the mountains, small house, Polonine, meadow in Carpathians, or Urde or Wurde, which is a kind of a sheep cheese, and also Bambetel as a chest. And the core words for the whole collection of the stories are the names of the timber rafters. So they are called plitnikes or plitnik in singular, or splavnik, which is also close to Ukrainian word plotohon, which is timber rafter. But those words, plitnik and splavnik, cannot be found in Yiddish dictionaries. And the word which is also connected to this is splav, or timber rafting, as a process, as an activity in general. It is also important to mention that the later reprintings, they eliminated the vast majority of the dialectical borrowings. And the dialectical borrowings and those Ukrainian words which were left, they were presented with footnotes, with translatings or explanations of the meaning of those words. Here are presented two citations. So the setting of these stories is either the river and its surroundings or the forests in which lumberjacks are working. And the nature in general, it stays in the close and constant contact with people. They are dependent on the nature and cannot make their living without it. And the distinctive feature is also the above-mentioned Ukrainian dialectical borrowings, with which the whole space and the landscape is described, is outlined, because they are its integral parts, and for several descriptions, no other words could be used, such as ich habe gehabt, der Klug auf des Plaves, Achtung gegeben, sie alles ist gut zugebunden und sehen die Kas der Tshermush halt sich abfallen, habe ich mich weggeschleppt in der Kolibe. Habe ich mich weggeschleppt in der Kolibe. I went to the small forest hut. As for depictions, as for describing of the Ukrainian peasants, the neighbors of the narrator, his family, and his surroundings, it is important to mention that in general, in Yiddish literature, in the late 19th century and at the beginning of 20th century, they generally tended to depict Ukrainians as part of a landscape, as background for social and economic activities of the shtetl. And they often referred simply as goyim, their language is Goyish, and they appear as a fixed cast of figures, settings, and situations in which they stay in contact with Jews. For example, in the marketplace. But here in these citations, we can see the close connection, for example, between narrator's father and an old Hutzul, which is a name for ethnic subgroup of Ukrainians of Bukovina. So this man, Koitsa Yaramchuk, works together with the narrator's father. And for many years, his father had been floating wood down the river with him. And it is stated that father loved him like a brother. And during long sploughs, during those river rides, he told stories. And in other citation, we have another Hutzul, which is also close to the narrator. So it is said that Chaim hat gefühlt zugebunden ist zu dem alten Hutzul. Ihn lieb bekommen wie leiblich Bruder, öfter noch mehr. So it's also loved him as his own brother, or maybe even more. And I'm going to present a couple of citations from the stories. Here we can see also one example of Ukrainian words transcribed in Yiddish and integrated in the original text. So the narrator is telling a story. Plötzlich hat das Feuer sich zerbrannt. Ich guck, a Zacken ist ausgewachsen neben mir, wie rausgesprungen von dem Wasser. Schädem hat sich mir ausgewiesen, tanzen herum der Kolibe. Straszno, straszno. So the narrator's friend telling him that that is a scary story. It's scary, very scary. Straszno, straszno. And in another story in der Kolibe, nur der Einzige, was sich mit dem Schlafen gehen, ist der alte Havrila, der älteste da in der Kolibe. Die Päuerim haben lieb dem alten Havrila. Waldhacker mit trunkene Pennemer Was geben selten, wenn Schmeichel Lachen breit, wenn Havrilo erzählt von ihm allein ausgetrachte leizonische Meises. So those episodes are also about the mystical stories, scary stories that are being told by those old Hutus. And as stated in the earlier citations, those stories were born on lazy summer evenings between sleepy shores and Russian waters. So water serves here also as liminal space between fictional and real, between storytelling and between this real life narration. And to sum up everything, so Yosef Burg depicts his native landscape. On one hand, it is a shared space and multicultural space, but the picture presented seems to be rather static. So it is, it could be described as a frozen or mythologized landscape of the nostalgic years. And in Burg's text, instead of othering, we have another dominant motive. It is mythologization of the shared liminal space, which serves as a melting pot for languages and cultures. And it is also very close and very connected to the nature, to the extent when it is impossible to divide ausgetrachtene stories, so fictional stories told by those narrators from the real life. Thank you very much.